One careless second can destroy a career, but sometimes it can change a life forever. The file slipped before Nia Brooks even realized her grip was failing. One moment, she was hurrying across the polished marble lobby of Hanul Group Tower, clutching a stack of legal reports against her chest, and the next, hundreds of pages burst into the air like startled white birds. Gasps rippled through the lobby. Papers drifted beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. A few sheets floated lazily toward the private elevator reserved for only one man in the entire building. Nia's stomach dropped. No, 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 no. She rushed forward, sneakers squeaking against the floor. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Then one thick file landed directly on a pair of handcrafted black Italian leather shoes. The entire lobby froze. Conversations died instantly. Security guards straightened. Executives stopped walking. Even the receptionist behind the marble desk looked away. Slowly, Nia lifted her eyes. CEO Jun Hyuk stood motionless beneath the golden lights. Tall, impeccably dressed. His charcoal suit looked as though it had been tailored onto him moments before. His expression revealed nothing. No irritation. No surprise. No anger. Somehow that was worse. Everyone in Seoul knew his name. Some called him a business genius. Others whispered darker things behind closed doors. Most simply called him untouchable. Employees joked that the building's temperature dropped 3 degrees whenever he entered a room. Nia had worked as an intern for exactly 11 days, and already she had heard enough stories to know one thing. Nobody wanted to be noticed by CEO Jun Hyuk. Unfortunately, every eye in the lobby was now fixed on her. The fallen pages scattered around his shoes like snow. Nia immediately crouched down. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said, gathering documents as quickly as she could. Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced herself to keep moving. The silence around her felt heavy, oppressive. She expected security to step forward. She expected someone to escort her out. Instead, nothing happened. The CEO simply watched. Nia reached for the last folder resting near his shoe. As she picked it up, a loose sheet partially slipped free from inside. Her eyes caught a single line of text before she could stop herself. One sentence. One phrase buried within a confidential document. Her hand froze. The blood drained from her face. It made no sense. She blinked once. Then again. The words remained there. Transfer authorization approved. Internal execution date confirmed. Nia's breath caught. She wasn't supposed to see that. She wasn't even supposed to be close enough to touch that folder. Yet something about the wording felt wrong. Deeply wrong. Before she could think further, a shadow fell across the page. CEO Jun Hyuk extended his hand. Not aggressively. Not impatiently. Simply waiting. Nia quickly slid the paper back into place and handed him the folder. Their eyes met for the first time. His gaze was calm. Cold. Sharp enough to make her feel as though every thought in her mind had been exposed. For a brief second, neither moved. Then the elevator doors opened behind him with a soft chime. The spell broke. Jun Hyuk accepted the file without a word and stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. The lobby breathed again. Conversations resumed in nervous whispers. Nia remained kneeling on the marble floor, clutching the remaining documents against her chest. Everyone thought the disaster was over. They were wrong, because the sentence she had accidentally read refused to leave her mind. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice warned her that what had just happened was not an accident at all. The next morning arrived gray and cold beneath a blanket of low clouds stretching across the Seoul skyline. Nia barely noticed. She had spent half the night reviewing notes she had copied into a small notebook, trying to understand whether the irregularities she found were mistakes or something more serious. By the time she stepped through the revolving doors of Hanul Group Tower, exhaustion lingered behind her eyes, but determination carried her forward. The lobby was already buzzing with unusual energy. Senior executives moved quickly across the marble floor. Assistants carried tablets and folders. Security presence seemed heavier than normal. Everyone knew the board meeting was important. Nobody knew exactly why. Nia rode the elevator to the 22nd floor and settled into her desk. The moment she logged into her computer, a company-wide message appeared again. Executive board meeting. 9 o'clock sharp. Attendance restricted. Beneath the notice sat a photograph of CEO Jun Hyuk. Even in the carefully controlled corporate image, he looked distant. Untouchable. His dark eyes revealed nothing. Nia had heard countless stories about him since joining the company. Some described him as brilliant. Others described him as ruthless. Nobody described him as kind. Yet what fascinated her most was not the rumors. It was the silence that followed whenever his name entered a conversation. People did not merely respect CEO Junhyuk. They feared disappointing him. At 8:45, movement outside the office windows caught her attention. Several black luxury vehicles rolled into the private entrance below. Employees near the glass immediately stopped talking. Nia looked down from 22 floors above. The first car door opened. CEO Junhyuk stepped out. Even from that distance, his presence seemed to alter the atmosphere around him. He moved calmly, surrounded by advisors and security personnel, but nobody walked beside him. There was always a few feet of empty space separating him from everyone else, as if an invisible wall traveled with him wherever he went. Back upstairs, conversations resumed in hushed tones. One associate leaned toward another. He slept 3 hours last night. How do you know? Because his chief assistant never left the building. Another employee shook her head. I heard he personally reviewed every acquisition contract before dawn. Nia listened quietly. The stories painted the same picture. A man who trusted no one. A man who carried every responsibility himself. A man who never seemed to rest. At exactly 9 o'clock, the executive floor elevators locked into restricted mode. The board meeting had begun. Nia tried focusing on her assignments, but her attention drifted repeatedly toward the files she had hidden inside her drawer. The missing approvals. The accelerated transfers. The unusual language. None of it felt accidental. Around 10:15, her computer chimed. A document request appeared from an executive office. One of the reference numbers immediately caught her eye. It matched the same internal code she had seen twice before. Her pulse quickened. Nia opened the request. The file had already been marked completed. Yet according to company records, the transaction itself had not officially occurred. She stared at the screen. Completed before execution. Approved without authorization. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Then a sudden silence spread across the office. Chairs stopped moving. Phones stopped ringing. Nia looked up. Every employee near the windows had straightened. The executive elevators had opened. CEO Junhyuk emerged onto the floor for the first time. His expression was calm, but something in his eyes had changed. The board meeting had clearly not gone as planned. And as he walked past the rows of desks, Nia felt a strange certainty settle deep in her chest. Whatever secret was hidden inside those files, it was already beginning to reach him. For the next several minutes, nobody on the 22nd floor seemed willing to breathe normally. CEO Junhyuk moved through the office with measured steps, accompanied only by his chief assistant. Yet the atmosphere around him felt heavier than the clouds gathering outside. Employees lowered their eyes. Screens suddenly became fascinating. Coffee cups remained untouched. Nia watched from her desk as he disappeared into a private conference room at the far end of the floor. The glass walls automatically darkened the moment the door closed. Whatever discussion was taking place inside was hidden from view. Still, the tension remained. Nia glanced toward the drawer containing her notes. The same questions continued circling through her mind. Why were approvals missing? Why were transactions marked complete before they officially existed? And most importantly, who was benefiting from it? She tried returning to work, but concentration slipped away each time another executive hurried past her desk. Something unusual was happening. She could feel it. Around noon, Mr. Park appeared carrying a tablet and a folder. His expression looked strained. Conference room C, he said without greeting. Take these documents upstairs. Immediately, Nia blinked. Me? Everyone else is occupied. Just deliver them and leave. He handed over the folder before she could ask another question. The executive floor was normally off limits to interns, but moments later she found herself standing inside a private elevator climbing toward the upper levels of the tower. Her reflection stared back from polished steel walls. She tightened her grip on the folder. The elevator chimed softly. The doors opened. Silence greeted her. The executive floor looked nothing like the busy offices below. Dark wood panels lined the hallways. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Thick carpets absorbed every footstep. The entire floor felt designed for people who controlled outcomes rather than reacted to them. Nia followed the signs until she reached conference room C. Through the partially open doorway, she could hear voices. Calm. Professional. Yet beneath the surface lingered unmistakable tension. She stepped closer. The transfer schedule cannot be delayed again, one man said. It is already approved. Another voice responded immediately. Approved by whom? The room fell silent. Nia froze. She knew that second voice. CEO Junhyuk. Even without seeing him, she recognized the calm authority in his tone. She should have left right then. Instead, something held her in place. The documentation was processed according to standard procedure, another executive answered. Then provide the missing authorizations, Junhyuk replied. No anger. No raised voice. Somehow that made the words more intimidating. A long pause followed. Nia felt her pulse quicken. Missing authorizations. The exact problem she had discovered. The folder in her hands suddenly felt heavier. Before she could think further, the conference room door opened wider. A senior executive stepped into the hallway and stopped. His eyes narrowed instantly. Who are you? Nia straightened. I am delivering documents from legal compliance. The executive looked irritated. Leave them here. Nia nodded and stepped forward. As she extended the folder, several pages slipped slightly from the stack. One corner folded back just enough for her to see a familiar code printed across the top page. The same code. The same transfer series. Her breath caught. Without thinking, she looked directly into the conference room. CEO Junhyuk sat at the far end of a long black table. His gaze lifted from the documents in front of him. Their eyes met. For one brief second, the room seemed to disappear. Nia knew she should walk away. She knew interns were not supposed to speak. Yet every warning bell in her mind grew louder. The missing approvals. The irregular records. The conversation she had just overheard. Before caution could stop her, the words escaped. Sir, she said quietly. Every head turned toward her. I think someone inside this company is setting you up. The silence that followed felt endless. Every executive inside the conference room turned toward Nia as if she had spoken a language nobody else understood. The air itself seemed to stop moving. For one terrible second, she wished she could take the words back. Not because they were untrue, but because she suddenly realized who she had said them to. CEO Junhyuk remained seated at the end of the table. His expression did not change. His eyes stayed fixed on her. Calm. Measuring. Impossible to read. One executive let out a short laugh. Another shook his head in disbelief. The senior executive standing nearest the door looked openly annoyed. What exactly did you just say? He asked. Nia swallowed carefully. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. I said I believe someone inside the company is manipulating transfer approvals. Several executives exchanged glances. The room instantly erupted into overlapping voices. This is ridiculous. She is an intern. Who allowed her access to these records? This is completely inappropriate. The criticism came from every direction. Nia stood frozen near the doorway, clutching the folder against her chest. She knew she should leave. She knew she had crossed a line. Yet the missing documents, the altered timelines, and the conversation she had overheard refused to let her stay silent. The executive nearest her folded his arms. Do you have proof? Nia hesitated. Not complete proof. The man's expression hardened immediately. Then you are making accusations against senior leadership without evidence. The room grew colder. Nia felt dozens of eyes judging her at once. Her face flushed. Still, she forced herself to speak. I found multiple transfer files marked completed before final authorization. Several approvals were missing entirely. Enough, another executive snapped. You are not qualified to interpret those records. More voices followed. Faster now. Sharper. The conference room that had seemed so controlled only moments earlier was suddenly filled with irritation. Several executives were no longer looking at Nia with skepticism. They were looking at her as a problem. CEO Junhyuk remained silent throughout the exchange. That silence somehow hurt more than the criticism. Finally, his chief assistant stepped forward. Miss Brooks, he said professionally, please return to your department. Nia looked toward CEO Junhyuk one final time. If he believed she was wrong, he only needed to say a single sentence. Instead, he simply lowered his gaze back to the documents on the table. The message was clear. The meeting was over. For her. 20 minutes later, she was sitting in a small administrative office on the 22nd floor. Mr. Park stood near the window looking exhausted. Human Resources had already been notified. The speed shocked her. You spoke during a restricted executive meeting, he said quietly. Do you understand how serious that is? Nia nodded. Yes. They are investigating how you accessed confidential information. Her stomach dropped. I did not access anything improperly. That may not matter. The words landed heavily between them. Outside the window, rain had begun falling across the city. Gray droplets streaked down the glass. Below, traffic moved slowly through wet streets. Inside the office, the silence felt unbearable. Mr. Park finally placed a document on the desk. Administrative suspension pending review. Nia stared at the paper. 11 days. She had lasted. 11 days before everything collapsed. Tuition, rent, her mother's medical payments. Every responsibility rushed into her thoughts at once. Yet beneath the fear, another feeling remained. Certainty. Because no matter what anyone believed, she knew the records were wrong. Somewhere inside Hanul Group, someone had altered procedures. Someone had hidden the truth. And as she walked out of the office carrying the suspension notice, she never noticed the security camera mounted above the hallway. Inside a private office 3 floors higher, CEO Junhyuk was watching the footage in complete silence. Rain followed Nia all the way out of Hanul Group Tower. By the time she reached the sidewalk, the city had dissolved into silver reflections and blurred headlights. People hurried beneath umbrellas. Traffic rolled through the wet streets. Nobody noticed the young woman carrying a suspension notice inside her bag. She walked without direction at first, letting the cold air clear the noise from her mind. The disappointment hurt more than she expected, not because she had been suspended, not because people doubted her, but because she had genuinely believed doing the right thing mattered. After nearly 30 minutes, she found herself near a small bus terminal several blocks from the financial district. The covered waiting area offered little protection from the wind. Water dripped steadily from the metal roof. Nia sat quietly on a bench and watched the rain. For the first time all day, she allowed herself to breathe. The city sounded different here. Softer. Far away from conference rooms and executive offices. She thought about her mother. About the sacrifices that had brought her this far. About how close she had come to building a future that felt secure. Then a sudden commotion broke the silence. A delivery van had stopped near the curb. One of the drivers, an older man wearing a reflective rain jacket, stumbled as he stepped out. Several boxes slipped from his hands. The man grabbed the side of the vehicle, trying to steady himself. Nobody nearby moved. Most people simply glanced over and returned to their phones. Nia stood immediately. She crossed the wet pavement and reached him just as he lowered himself onto the curb. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked. The driver forced a weak smile. "I think I skipped lunch." His face looked pale beneath the streetlights. Nia crouched beside him. "Please stay seated." She opened her bag and removed a bottle of water along with the sandwich she had planned to save for dinner. Without hesitation, she handed both to him. The driver looked surprised. "You do not have to do that." "Yes, I do," she replied gently. The man accepted the food. After several minutes, some color slowly returned to his face. The tension in his shoulders eased. Rain continued falling around them. Cars passed. The city moved on. Yet for that brief moment, nothing felt urgent. Nothing felt complicated. Just one person helping another. Eventually the driver stood again. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Most people walked right past me." Nia smiled. "Then I am glad I stopped." Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street. The windows were dark. The engine remained running. Inside, CEO Junhyuk sat alone in the back seat. He had left the tower nearly an hour earlier after reviewing security footage and personnel records connected to Nia Brooks. He had not intended to stop. He had certainly not intended to watch. Yet there he remained, observing through rain-streaked glass as the suspended intern gave away her own dinner to a stranger. No cameras. No audience. No advantage to gain. Just kindness. For reasons he could not explain, he found himself unable to look away. And for the first time since meeting her, a question entered his mind that had nothing to do with missing documents or suspicious transfers. He wondered who Nia Brooks truly was. The following morning began with an urgency that spread through Hanul Group long before sunrise. Lights were already glowing on executive floors when CEO Junhyuk stepped out of his private elevator carrying a thick stack of internal reports. He had barely slept. After leaving the bus terminal the previous night, he had ordered a complete review of every transfer authorization connected to the codes Nia had mentioned. What started as a routine Verification quickly became something far more troubling. One discrepancy became 5. 5 became 12. By 7 o'clock, an entire conference table was covered with files. Missing signatures. Altered approval chains. Transactions marked complete before review. The pattern was undeniable now. Someone inside the company had been quietly manipulating records for months. Jun Hyuk stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city while his chief assistant organized the evidence. Rain clouds still lingered over Seoul, casting long gray shadows across the skyline. "How many departments are affected?" he asked. "At least 6, the assistant replied. "Possibly more." Jun Hyuk's expression hardened. "Who authorized the transfers?" The assistant hesitated. "That is the problem. Every trail eventually leads back to Executive Director Choi Sung-min." Silence filled the office. Choi Sung-min had worked beside him for 12 years. He had attended family events, negotiated major acquisitions, sat at the executive table longer than almost anyone else. If the findings were accurate, the person responsible was not a stranger hidden somewhere in the company. It was one of the people Jun Hyuk trusted most. By mid-morning, a private audit team had verified the documents independently. Their conclusion matched Nia's suspicions exactly. Procedures had been bypassed. Authorizations had been manipulated. Millions of dollars in assets were tied to transactions that should never have been approved. For the first time in years, CEO Jun Hyuk felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, disappointment, deep and quiet, the kind that settled heavily in the chest. Across the city, Nia sat inside a small neighborhood library reviewing internship applications. Her suspension remained active. Her future remained uncertain. Yet she refused to stop moving forward. She was updating her resume when her phone suddenly vibrated. An unknown number appeared on the screen. Nia almost ignored it. Almost. Instead, she answered. "Hello, Miss Brooks." The voice was calm and professional. "This is Lee Hyun-woo from the executive office at Hanul Group." Nia sat upright immediately. "Yes, Mr. CEO would like you to return to the tower this afternoon." Her heart skipped. "Am I being called for another review?" A brief pause followed. "No, Miss Brooks." The assistant's tone softened slightly. "You are being called because your concerns were correct." Nia stared through the library window as pedestrians moved beneath umbrellas outside. For several seconds, she could not speak. Back inside Hanul Group Tower, CEO Jun Hyuk stood alone in the executive conference room where everything had started. The evidence lay spread across the table. The truth was finally visible. And among all the executives, auditors, lawyers, and advisors surrounding him, the one person who had seen it first had been a 23-year-old intern carrying a stack of dropped files. Nia arrived at Hanul Group Tower just after 3 o'clock that afternoon. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city wrapped in a soft silver light that reflected across glass buildings and wet streets. As she stepped through the revolving doors, she immediately noticed something had changed. The whispers were gone. The curious stares remained, but they carried a different weight now. Not judgment. Uncertainty. No one seemed quite sure how to look at her. An executive assistant met her in the lobby and guided her toward the private elevators. Neither spoke during the ride upward. The quiet felt strangely familiar. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, Nia followed the assistant down the same hallway where everything had unraveled only days earlier. The same dark wood walls, the same thick carpet, the same conference room. Yet this time the atmosphere felt entirely different. The assistant opened the door. "Mr. CEO is waiting." Nia stepped inside. The long conference table was empty except for one person. CEO Jun Hyuk stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His jacket rested on a nearby chair. The late afternoon light softened the sharp lines of his face, making him appear less distant than before. For several seconds neither spoke. Nia suddenly became aware of how large the room felt, how quiet it was. Finally, Jun Hyuk turned toward her. "Thank you for coming." The words surprised her, not because they were polite, because they sounded sincere. Nia stopped near the end of the table. "Your assistant said my concerns were correct." Jun Hyuk nodded once. They were. He walked toward the table and placed several documents in front of her. Audit reports, internal findings, authorization records. Nia immediately recognized the transfer codes. "The investigation confirmed multiple violations," he said. "If you had not spoken up, they would have continued unnoticed." Nia looked down at the reports. A strange mixture of relief and sadness settled inside her. She had been right. Yet being right had cost her nearly everything. Jun Hyuk seemed to understand. You were suspended because of information I failed to verify myself. Nia slowly lifted her eyes. Sir, I was an intern. Nobody expected me to know what I was talking about. I should have listened anyway. The admission hung quietly between them. Nia blinked. She was not sure she had heard correctly. Powerful people rarely apologized. Men like CEO Jun Hyuk almost never did. Yet there he stood accepting responsibility without excuses. Outside the windows, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time all day. Golden reflections spread across the skyline. Jun Hyuk glanced toward the city before speaking again. For years, I believed trust was a liability. His voice remained calm. I built systems, rules, layers of control. I assumed they were enough. He looked back at her. Then the only person who told me the truth was someone I barely knew. Nia felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. Not from fear. From something else. Something warmer. She saw no arrogance in his expression now. No distance. Only honesty. Jun Hyuk reached into a folder and removed a document. Your suspension has been revoked. He placed it gently on the table. Then he added a second document beside it. And I would like to offer you a permanent position within legal compliance after graduation. Nia stared at the paper in disbelief. For a moment she could not speak. Across the table, CEO Jun Hyuk found himself watching her smile for the first time. And unexpectedly, it felt like the brightest thing in the room. 6 months later, winter arrived in Seoul with crisp air and clear skies. The city sparkled beneath thousands of lights as preparations for Hanul Group's annual gala filled one of the most prestigious hotels in the country. Executives, investors, and business leaders gathered beneath towering chandeliers, while soft music drifted through the grand ballroom. Conversations flowed easily. Crystal glasses reflected golden light. Everything appeared elegant and effortless. Yet the biggest topic of discussion was not a merger or an acquisition. It was a young woman who had quietly transformed the culture of an entire company. Nia Brooks stepped out of the elevator and entered the ballroom wearing a simple navy evening dress that reflected her usual style, professional, confident, and understated. She had completed her internship with distinction and had already begun working alongside the legal compliance team while finishing her final semester. More importantly, employees across the company respected her, not because of the investigation, not because she had exposed hidden problems. They respected her because she treated everyone the same way, from senior executives to security guards in the lobby. As she entered the room, several colleagues greeted her warmly. Others smiled and waved. The atmosphere felt completely different from the day she had walked through the building carrying a suspension notice. Across the ballroom, CEO Jun Hyuk stood near the windows overlooking the city. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass, glowing beneath the winter night. Months earlier, he would have spent the evening discussing contracts and performance reports. Tonight, his attention kept drifting toward the entrance. When he finally saw Nia, something unexpected happened. He smiled. It was subtle, brief, yet genuine. Those closest to him noticed immediately. The man once known for emotional distance had changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily, quietly. The change had begun the moment someone challenged him with the truth and expected nothing in return. Nia eventually joined him near the windows. For a moment neither spoke. They simply looked out across the city lights below. The silence felt comfortable now. Familiar. Quite a view, Nia said softly. Jun Hyuk nodded. It is. Then he glanced toward her. Although I think I spent most of the evening waiting for someone to arrive. Nia laughed gently. The sound seemed to warm the cold winter light around them. Below, traffic moved through the city like streams of gold. Above, stars appeared between scattered clouds. For the first time in many years, CEO Jun Hyuk felt no need to control the future. No need to predict every outcome. Some things were worth trusting. Some people were worth trusting. And sometimes the most important person in a room was the one nobody expected to notice. The gala continued around them, but neither seemed in a hurry to return to the crowd. The city breathed quietly beyond the glass. The journey that had started with scattered files on a polished floor had become something neither of them could have imagined. Not because of power, not because of status, but because truth had been met with courage, and courage had been met with kindness. The lights of Seoul shimmered across the windows as they stood together, looking toward whatever came next. If you enjoyed this story and believe that kindness and integrity still matter, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who could use a little hope today. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life.